Dr. Khanzadeh, this is the latest we're getting, and as we were just discussing that, even though Trump has mentioned that most of the objectives have been achieved, regime change has occurred and they have severely curtailed the military capability of Iran. We understand that Iran is nowhere trying to back down. In fact, the resolve which they had earlier, it's now become more hardline. Now, given the latest developments, how do you think Iran is going to be responding, to the latest statements that are coming in?
Yeah, so I think the Islamic Republic now is going to wait and see what the next move will be from the United States. As far as the strategy that the regime has with Israel, it's still the same strategy. It's still attacking Israel every day, launching drones and missiles towards central Israel, while the Houthis attack from the south and also Hezbollah attacks from the north. When it comes to attacking U.S. military bases or U.S. assets throughout the region, that is going to be a wait and see from the Islamic Republic, because we have to keep in mind that this regime, like I said, they have been preparing for this conflict essentially for their entire existence. They knew that this would happen eventually. It was inevitable for them. And having that kind of mindset and taking that level of psychology towards this conflict, this regime knows that this is an existential war. Because if they do not continue this conflict, if they do not inflict enough damage towards the United States and towards Israel, they know they're just buying their time until the next conflict. And they can't afford that, because domestically they are very weakened. Not just from the protesters, but also within the regime itself. I actually have a book coming out where I dissect the internal structures of the regime. And you have members of the regime who are very active, very hardline, very supportive. But then you have the passive members of the regime who essentially are a part of this regime because it's a paycheck, because inflation is so high, because of sanctions. They're essentially just wanting to have a paycheck so they can feed their kids and pay their mortgage, pay their rent, and have a roof over their heads. But it's going to get to a point where those passive members of this regime are going to find that this ship is sinking and we need to mobilize and unite and defect and go towards the protesters and try to change this country for the better. And until that happens, those that are in the active camp, those that are staunch supporters, hardline supporters of this regime, will do everything in this power to keep this regime alive. And that even means killing its own citizens, and that means bombing its own neighbors until either, like I said, the US and Israel just get tired and don't want to fight anymore and come to an agreement where there will be some type of reassurance that these types of conflicts will not happen.
Dr. Khanzadeh, isn't that the point that the US is making because of the deaths that took place in January? Because that is extremely condemnable. There is nothing that justifies killing of civilians. And there were reports Iran had itself accepted the death toll in the thousands in January. And that essentially has now spiraled, of course. What we are seeing right now, it was unilaterally started by the US in the midst of diplomacy, but nothing justifies the death of civilians. But let me just quickly go a little further from there.
Right.
As far as the troop deployment is concerned, we are seeing boots on ground, and they're only increasing. These are US boots near, and the exact locations, of course, are not disclosed. But there are also deployments of A-10 attack planes. These are Warthogs, mostly seen in conjunction with ground troops. Are the next 2 to 3 weeks also going to see the war extend into the ground domain with more boots on ground from the US side?
It's tough to say with a high level of certainty. What I've been able to piece together talking to my colleagues who are more of the military expert mind, we see a pattern right now from the US military where the assets that they've been moving and the types of, essentially soldiers that they've been moving towards Iran hint towards a more of a targeted and also, strategic type of attack where it's not, boots on the ground, so to speak, like what we saw in, the US invasion of Iraq, but more of a strategic attack, kind of like how Navy SEALs went into Afghanistan and took out bin Laden, or the way like the way the U.S. Went into Venezuela, for example. So it would be more of those type of strategic attacks where I think where I think the United States will more go towards Kharg Island in the north of the Persian Gulf, and then also get more strategic in the Strait of Hormuz. But again, we saw what Trump said in his speech today, where essentially like the U.S. is going to back out of that, but they will be there for assistance and help. But again, Trump flip-flops so much, we just can't take him at his word. But if we look at the actions of what the U.S. military is doing, that seems to be more of the calculus, where it's more pinpoint attacks in key sites at the Strait of Hormuz and at Kharg Island, which is where Iran has its oil factories. So I think that would be the assessment. I don't think it would be in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I think again, Trump is playing checkers, so we're going to see what happens in these next 2 to 3 weeks.
I hear your point. Dr.
Yeah.
Khanzadeh, thanks so much for making time for us. And 2 to 3 weeks is now the timeline that has been given. Some voices are also suggesting that he's laid the groundwork for perhaps a longer war, even if it doesn't end in 2 to 3 weeks. We'll need to wait and watch. Right. As of now, that's the timeline that we stay with. Dr. Reza Khanzadeh joining us from Washington. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.